5 of series Pathwalking by Light. This is one of the final lectures in the Danse Macabre section. I think we have one more after this before we move into section 2. And this one is called Freefalling Cancels Gravity. And with that said, Light, go ahead and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And let's head straight into this. So, series Pathwalking, specifically the first section of Danse Macabre, has been talking about a couple of different attributes, different topics that have to do with the experience of walking your path, starting with like Mara's maze, explaining why there's these trials and tribulations. In Paranoia and its Children, we're talking about some of the ways we experience these, but also talking about what they contribute, how they actually can assist us in this path. With I and the Other and Communal Emergence, talked a bit more about the interplay of different observers, different people walking their path. These current lecture will be a bit more personal. There will be some personal experiences that explain how I managed to incorporate these notions into my own experience and how they've helped me walk my path. Whereas the next one will Eternal Reoccurrence. We'll try to fit all of these together and see if that can assist you within your own path. So we're going to start with the lecture. A little recap. First one, Mara's Maze. We talked about the natural antagonist. So Mara's Maze is the facilitator of free will. Moments of doubt bring us a sort of flame of awareness, and from that awareness, we can start making choices. Modes of engagement, a free path flows. At a crossroad, one learns to know. It's at these crossroads, these moments of choice, that we can make a deliberate choice from which often new kinds of understanding forms that can open up new paths, close off certain paths. As participants, both you and I, everyone, we exist as an individual and I, but others are also an I, and we impact the way how the world essentially works through that self, that I. And in the end, we all end up contributing to the emergence of existence as a whole as we follow these paths, as the influences from our own self, our own mind, come into play during our path walking. Now, what I'll be talking about first are 3 short tales. Free writing is something that happened to me yesterday, but it's very much related to what I'll be talking about today. It's a method of how I helped understand a feeling that I couldn't quite speak out loud. It wasn't fully there in my understanding in language, but came out through a very free way interacting with just writing. Black boxing, which is a method that I use, very much a magical form of method. And that's related to a story how I broke into my old home with practically no repercussions. That's a very interesting one. And free falling, how self-immolation led to a resurrection of sorts. Now, it didn't die, literally at least, but it did essentially change my path in a way that is felt similar to this. So, first story being free writing. Yesterday, I was sitting in the evening, just sitting with myself, trying to figure out what I was supposed to do. And I have these occasional moments where I'm just sitting there. There's a bunch of stuff I have to do. There's projects to work on, there's this presentation to work on, but nothing was really happening. I was a bit paralyzed, in essence. And I tried to figure out how to get out of this, maybe just start some random project, write something, do something. And what ended up happening is I grabbed a piece of paper and I just started writing some words on them. I wrote them out here. Lorium eras oal tuat indignias entas. For those of you who are familiar with either any kind of Latin language or Latin in itself, this is not a proper sentence. This is the words, maybe even the grammar, is not correct. The words might look a lot like it, even have these components that are similar to it, but it doesn't have a clear translation. Regardless, when I wrote them, it just felt like writing some letters, writing some words, and I didn't have any intention for what I wanted to write. Simply just let the words appear one after another. The letters I had to write literally came to me as I was writing them. Now, this sentence does have a approximate interpretation, which is something about either you're authentic or you fall from a false sense of self. I can look up quite quickly what the literal translation was that I have over here. So I believe the interpretation was, let's take it over here. Either you are genuine or you stand in a false sense of greatness. Well, that's quite a heavy, loaded sentence. And it originated from a feeling that I had, and it just came out. The way you understand things by sense, by feeling, doesn't always have a perfect literal translation. There's not always a language that perfectly speaks it. But in a way, your brain will try to use the best tools it has to let that feeling come into language. One of the beautiful things about this free writing thing, where you essentially abandon all intentions to write a proper sentence, and where you don't even know what it is you're writing, is that stuff like this can come up. You can bring out these feelings that you have and turn them into at least something that's somewhat tangible. And after that, you can start trying to dig into it, interpret it. There is, in a way, something very helpful in trying to abandon all of these, not necessarily arbitrary, but in the moment, maybe arbitrary rules that you apply in yourself and trying to express, and just trying to create something. This is very much almost like an artistic process where you just let it happen. And to me, the somewhat translation actually made a lot of sense. There is a occasional moment where I struggle to acknowledge the achievements that I have, because sometimes they just kind of happen. It feels like I mediate them rather than I put effort and attention into them. It just happens. And those achievements, because there was no series of struggles, feels like, can I really claim those as a foundation for my own ability? Whereas actually they are very much representative of that. It is, like I said previously, whenever there's no crossroads, whenever it just happens, that is a beautiful moment where it shows that developing yourself has actually worked. To simply let things come into being without having all of the struggles with it, that's actually a sign of a very stable self. Thus, I was having a doubt that, in retrospect, could actually be completely negated by simply thinking about it for a moment. And so anytime now into the future, when I have the same doubt come up, I can just answer it right away, like already proven to myself. It's okay. I am standing in my own shoes with a lot of confidence and capabilities, and I shouldn't have to doubt myself in this way. And that just comes from writing a single sentence in just a moment. It felt like a throwaway moment, but it can actually have a lot of impact. So this practice of free writing is definitely something that I'm going to be trying to do more. even though the language that I create that ends up in the sentence isn't proper. It's the feeling underneath that really matters. And so long it forms a somewhat intelligible sentence, you can work with it. The next one is a bit wilder. This is what I refer to black boxing. So a couple of years ago, I think that's approximately 2 years ago, I made a bit of a mistake. 2.5 years. I was in a living situation where I was living anti-squat. So sometimes you squat a building and you just live there because nobody's using it. You don't really have another choice. Now, some corporations here offer the ability to live in those buildings and pay like very little rent. It's one of the cheapest ways of living here. And I did it for approximately 5.5 years. Wonderful experience, met some great people. But when I had to move from one building to another, because it happens, the building got demolished, I ended up going back to my first anti-squat home because I first lived in a primary school for a little while, had an entire classroom to myself, and then I moved to a building that used to be a high school. And they have these wonderful places where they used to have these planks on the walls with little metal holders, essentially. And I did have the planks, but not the metal holders. So I figured, you know what I should do? I should go back to my old classroom at about 3 at night and just enter, grab some of those metal holders, and then take them back so I now have something to put these planks on. Now, you might already figure that that's not very much a bright idea because that's literally breaking and entering. But I figured it can't be that bad. There's nobody living there anymore. Nobody will know. So I ended up going there. And I had left the window of my room on like a little opening so I could just had one of the sliding windows. I could just slide it open, enter, and then grab the stuff and leave. So I slide open the window. I put my bag in the middle of the room. There was a little table-like thing. And I walk to one of the cupboards that's like stuck to the wall. I open it, grab some of those metal things, walk back to my bag. I put them in there. And that's when I noticed that in the corner of the room, there were 2 little lights. Oh, that was a camera. I had been got. And usually those situations don't end very well. But I made the only sensible choice, which is I put down my bag and I started walking straight at the camera. And when I stood close to it, I just smiled and waved like a maniac. Like, hi, fun to see you there. And then I walked back to my bag. I left the room, closed the window, and went back home. Next day, I was a little bit stressed at work because I figured I'm going to get called by this corporation. I'm not currently living with them. I just broke into a building that they're supposed to, secure. I felt stressed the entire day. But I had an ace up my sleeve because a few days prior, a brother of someone who I was living with in that building had come by and mentioned, well, actually, did you know that your contract with this corporation is not actually legal? What do you mean? Well, they make you pay about $100 for utilities, and by law, they're not allowed to do that. It's like up to like 60 or 70. So I ended up having some kind of dirt on them. And the entire day, I was just going through a narrative in my head where it was like, if they call me, they threaten to kick me out, I'm going to threaten to sue them. It's like I was building up a lot of energy that day in a way, where I was constantly going through that narrative, what I was going to say. I was feeling a lot of anger. I was building up sort of emotional energy. And it ended up resulting into a very funny situation where, yeah, by the end of the day, I got a call from them. And the person that called me sounded very timid, almost a little bit scared in a way. And he asked, like, so why were you there at like 3 at night? I was like, well, I was retrieving some stuff from my room. Yeah, but you essentially just broke in. And I was like, yeah, I was completely open and honest about the situation. And the whole call ended with them saying, don't do that again, okay? I had no repercussions, really. I got a singular warning, but I didn't have enough yet to get kicked out, and they just let it rest. What they also informed me is that these cameras are directly connected with an alarm that alerts the police. And it just so happened that that camera in that one room malfunctioned, meaning there was no alarm sent to the police. The end result of this entire endeavor is either a complete series of luck or a hilariously funny joke. And I tend to go for the latter because in that moment, I just kind of accepted whatever came to me. I saw the camera and I walked at it. I smiled at it. I waved at it. And some people there actually had a bit of a laugh. And I personally am inclined to believe that contributed to the camera malfunctioning. Now, is there any kind of backing behind this other than just a gut feeling? Who knows? But what happened in that situation was I didn't cause necessarily any suffering. Instead, I actually made a few people's their day. And in return, I did not have to deal with the police. These are sort of miniature miracle-like events that feel like pure luck. But the way I handled it, the way I dealt with it, is something I do more often. And I am, in that regard, incredibly lucky when it comes to many, many different moments. And there is a sort of, I would say, I don't know if it's a karmic effect or something, but in a way, if you contribute to people's their lives in a way that feels very much like you're giving them a bit of a boost of benefit, it's like love, joy, whatever you want to call it. Sometimes life does throw you these kind of bones, and it's happened to me way more often than to say, well, you know, sometimes it happens. It happens so consistently that I'm very disinclined to believe it's just luck. Statistically, it's very unlikely. But I also want to address the conversation that happened at the phone. What I did in that moment was basically spend a whole day like riling up my own self. Like I spent hours just going through that narrative, building a kind of energy in myself that was made of pure anger, spite. Quite intimidating. I would argue if someone had walked up to me and talked with me, I could have come over quite intimidating because of the vibe that I was essentially calling up. And that's exactly what I felt when I had this conversation with the guy on the phone, because he sounded almost scared. And there's no reason for this person to be scared because I'm the one living with them. But I should be the one that's scared. And this is one of the ways how when you build up a sort of energy, some people can kind of feel that. And even if it's through a phone conversation, that can still reach them. There is a way from either a positive or negative situation, or maybe even neutral situation, to take the moment and to start kind of culminating a sort of, I would call it like an energy potential. And with certain intention, you kind of flavor it. And it also has definite direct effects. This is only one example, but I've managed to do this a few times. And I sometimes call it like a little bit of vibe bending or a bit of mental alchemy, but you do genuinely create a sort of potential that ends up impacting your path. I sometimes refer more to chaos magic because regardless of the situation, regardless of what kind of situation I'm in, whether I feel really good or bad, or energy ends up coming up in me, through pure intent, I just warp it into something instrumentalized. And given the situation I got away with here, I would argue it worked pretty well. For those who are interested in other situations, I can tell about those after the lecture, but it will take very long if I go through all of them. because this is a practice that I've been doing for quite a while. Both the getting lucky and I guess potentially having intimidated someone through a phone call even though they couldn't see my face. And then the third one, free falling, which is very on point. So a few months after this break-in, I was hitting a download. I had at that point spent about 5+ years not participating in either work or study. My social group was disintegrating. I ended up also getting kicked out because I was breaking the rules of the place where I was living. I was in a position in life where I had no intention to do anything, no passion for anything. Everything was just kind of shite. I spent 5 years tearing through all kinds of topics, through different forms of media, from books and videos and everything. I was spending a lot of time learning, but not improving my own life. And it's a pretty good example of how fully focusing yourself on learning through occult methods can be very wonderful and feel like you're really enriching yourself. But if you're not integrating it into your life, it's very rough for it to actually do much. And I ended up getting kicked out. I was forced to move in back with my mom for a few months. And in that moment, I thought to myself, well, I guess I'm a bit of a stereotype kind of failed individual right now. I'm just a guy who didn't manage to finish a course, a study. I forced to move back home, lost everything, don't have a job. And rather than continuing this thought that I had for years, which is, no, I'm actually working on something. I'm developing. I just said to myself, okay, I am nothing, I have failed. And I got incredibly sick. For about a week, I was physically ill, constantly in a state of grieving, as you will. It felt like my entire self that I had been working on for 5 years was completely being disintegrated. And that was also what was happening. And this was one of the best things that could have happened to me. Because after that grieving period, started working with a social worker then that was basically helping me return to integrate into society, which was something I had been very disinclined to. And within a few months, I managed to get myself a house, a job, a wonderful partner. Everything was suddenly looking up. And this is a very good example of how you can essentially hamstring yourself in life, which is the reason why nothing was working was because the self that I had been developing about that I was developing was full of denial and other kind of weights. I essentially build up this very high sense of self where I was thinking, well, look at all of these things I'm working about, all these things I'm getting knowledge about. Like I felt very bright. And yeah, I was quite good at this. I'm very good at learning things by myself, but it never got me to do anything. All of the knowledge was just sitting there, and it essentially built a false image of myself. Having this moment where all of that stuff came crumbling down essentially broke a bunch of barriers that I have put up for myself. Those barriers were essentially made to protect this false ego, essentially. And after all of them broke away through this essentially process of grieving, I just kind of restarted everything. I said, you know what, I'll just have to start at the bottom, I guess. And what happened was all of that, what was called like sort of tension that had been built, broke free. And suddenly, in absence of this false ego, I started accelerating through life. I had not wasted those 5 years. I had simply misunderstood what I had done there. And through building this false ego, I essentially locked myself out of doing anything with it. Because there was a certain, there was a doubt. I had learned all of this stuff by myself, but without any external factor or person being able to affirm anything of it. There was no teacher telling me, no, you did this well, you did this wrong. There was only me, and only my own conviction of that which I had learned. And through letting all those barriers break, I simply didn't care anymore whether or not what I had done in those 5 years was actually useful or proper. And that took away so many problems, because now with this open, like free engagement, it's by taking this drop, essentially, by taking this fall, I had become weightless. And now I'm flying through life. At my job, I'm being currently trained to dive into industrial programming. And as I went through my first course, I realized this is so easy. And it definitely has to do partly with the way how I developed my own method of thinking, of approaching life. So I hadn't wasted those years, but I simply didn't dare to put myself into a situation where it was tested, because there was nothing that had allowed me for it to be proven. And thus there was a doubt, there was a fear that it would be disproven, and that would be a tremendous damage to the ego. This was a genuine case of where taking that, essentially that fall, where you almost return yourself to a sense of like nothing. It didn't destroy myself. It purely just destroyed the ego. All of the things that I truly learned were still there, and now we're free to flow and to make things happen. And they very much are making things happen. One of the reasons why I've done these lectures is because I'm finally convinced that there is something in them. And with the feedback I've gotten so far from a few people, it seems that there really is. I would not have been able to do that before. This fall was essentially one of the more important things, because now I can continue with life. It's the example of what it can be like to be either stuck in the maze or to start dancing with it. And sometimes it does require you to just take a bit of a hit, because sometimes it is yourself that really holds yourself back. And once you've taken the moment to be either faced with something that might disprove it, or faced by something that makes it feel like everything was for nothing, it takes away that doubt, and now it doesn't matter anymore. And suddenly you start proving something to yourself, like, oh shit, it actually is something. You begin to surprise yourself, and you float up again. There is such a big benefit to moving through life using both those positives and negatives. You only try to chase all of those positives, all of the good, all of the affirming, all of the nice, it will eventually inflate a false ego, and like Icarus, you fall. But moving between going up and down, it keeps you a lot closer to the real self that has a foundation to it, and that can make things simply happen. I tend to refer to these two as the accelerator and the inertial. So doubt and cognition are essential when mediating your choices in life, right? Doubt is essential in the ability to make free choices, like we mentioned in the first lecture. But it can have an inertial effect, like breaking your flow. For anyone that's like an avid gamer or artist who uses a lot of like the flow state, it sucks when it gets broken. Absolutely sucks. In those moments, you mainly just let things kind of happen, and you can often surprise yourself with what it is that you're making happen. Reasoning is important, can be overdone, and sometimes you are highly capable, incredibly capable, but because you're letting yourself think about it, it becomes counterproductive, because now you're stopping that flow from simply happening. In a way, once again, just free falling, letting yourself, embracing the potential of either it going well or it going wrong, can be one of the best choices you can make. Either it simply happens, which is amazing, or it doesn't happen, And the best part about it is it does take away the doubt. It doesn't have to mean that you're fully incapable, that you can't do shit. It just means that in that moment there was something that was still unable to, but now it became in part clear. You've been given a mirror, and if you're willing to see it that way and not take this kind of backlash as some reason to just completely quit. I know there are some people that are very inclined that at any moment of things not going well, they just say, "Fuck it, I'm gonna give up, throw it away. It's not for me." It is part of the process of going through life. It's very much worth engaging with that way. And eventually it leads you to the situation where you are very capable of maintaining sort of focus and aim in either your daily life or even performing rituals. That's something I've also personally experienced, is that being able to maintain a sort of concentration, sort of free flow during these moments, it's really, really important. There is in that it's in that moment, for example, with that day where I was at work, because I consistently the entire day through kept my focus on what that call was going to be like. I managed to accumulate an incredible amount of I was practically sweating by the time they called me because my whole body was glowing and hot, and I was riled up. If I at any point had been distracted by someone and that energy had faded, then there was a chance that when they called me, I would have maybe even panicked. But there was a sort of active, assertive, almost aggressive energy that made sure I would not panic and give in and go down a different route. Another thing is that sometimes when we overthink, I love the term analysis paralysis because it's so applicable to so many cases. We can create more crossroads for ourselves than what is required. Being able to kind of let go can more or less erase arbitrary crossroads, maintain a certain flow. And again, maintaining that flow is an incredible experience because it takes away a lot of the weight in life. Make sure you have even more energy to go through your day. It sometimes makes some very interesting things happen. So that's one of the main things I want to give as a piece of advice from this lecture. It's about absolving weight. One of the things I mentioned before about that is shadow work is key. So inhibitions that reside within due to an unintegrated shadow will inevitably come to bite you in the ass. They will at some point pop up, and sometimes they will be able to pop up at the worst possible situation. Another thing that an unintegrated shadow does is it messes very much with what I refer to as your emotional flows, with certain experiences that evoke certain emotions get a bit disturbed by them. And you do need a very free access to the whole range, the whole spectrum of emotion if you want to be able to go through your paths as freely as possible. And even in the performance of different kinds of magic, I do believe that you really want to have access to the whole spectrum of flow of emotion, because the experiences that I have had that are most outrageous, most crazy, were the ones where all of them could flow free. It's very much a personal experience, but I can also see very much reason into why it would be similar for others. Now, trauma is a bitch. I think pretty much everyone can agree on that has or is dealing with trauma to some degree. There's no direct advice there that I can give you other than just you're working on it the best way you can with whatever means you have. Just a bitch. But compulsions can be a trigger point similar to trauma. And like I mentioned in the first talk, like learning to break away from rules you place on yourself can open up your practice. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean take whatever morals you've built up as an individual, throw them into the fire, and uh, go into full egoism or whatever. But it's in the case of that free writing, uh, I ended up abandoning a inclination to make a sentence that was perfectly following certain language structures. I just simply let it happen. It can open up your practice by trying to figure out which kind of compulsions, which kind of rules that I've set for myself don't necessarily contribute, which ones can be arbitrary in some situations. And some subconscious triggers that you might have, compulsions, can also be worked around or instrumentalized. If you know that there are certain experiences that cause a trigger, that evoke a certain feeling or behavior, you can instrumentalize them in the case of where whenever I go down a specific paranoid spiral by choice, as like something I've integrated with a ritual, I know that there are certain experiences, certain smells, sounds, etc., that can just break the experience and then allow me to essentially go back up. It's something you're gonna have to figure out for yourself, but as you work on these different methods, and maybe even think about kind of what the stories were that I told. They were all examples how you can kind of do your path walk and engaging with the world, doing things where you don't put a certain pressure on it. I didn't go completely scared and paranoid, like, oh no, I've been caught on my camera, what do I do now? There was nothing I could do about it, so let's make the most of it. This language thing, the writing the sentence. Fuck it. It's not like you writing a sentence offends someone or does something horrible. You might as well. There are ways to alleviate these pressures, these weights, and make yourself a bit free of them. And they will often lead you to experience paths or even capabilities of yourself that you were previously kind of restricting, keeping yourself in a little bit of a chain. And there are many, many more examples of this. So I would definitely recommend people to maybe even take a few moments or a few days of meditation and writing and just try to figure out what are restraints and limitations I experience in life that in retrospect don't actually necessarily come from like the external world, which are the ones that I put in there. And how can I try to engage with them in a way where I alleviate myself of these, where I take a moment, a leap of faith, an attempt to see what does happen if I just ignore them. Well, not often just ignoring them. There goes a bit of effort into it occasionally. But you can end up opening up this maze, Mara's maze, essentially, breaking down certain walls in it. And you can also come to learn that certain things that are affecting you don't necessarily come from like an other. They do come from the self. And it is a incredible method to allow yourself to just accomplish more in life. Sometimes when things just don't seem to work, you say, fuck it, and we try. If there is no reason, rhyme or reason that is telling you how to get out of it, how to get through it in any other way, then throw all of the reason into the wind and just fucking go. So I also implore you to try out this idea of like free writing, where even if it sounds like you're having gibberish sentences, just sounds or something, just try putting them down, and you might surprise yourself with what comes out. And as for black boxing, well, it's a bit more complicated, and I am willing to also give some more lectures about, or another lecture later where I could extend this series with like a fourth series of lectures where there's like a couple different topics I would want to go into. I wrote them down here as like chaos magic, breaking down the laws of physics, strengthening the mental immune system, or demons as foster parents of humanity. There are a couple of different lectures I've been thinking about that I might extend onto this, but those are for way later. And black boxing would probably be one of them because it is a very direct method of essentially accumulating energy and essentially kind of slightly warping your path with it. Does anyone have questions? I haven't really given many opportunities for people to ask questions, so go for it. Been on a bit of a rant. If no hands are raised, I'm gonna just move to the last slide. So in 2 days, on Thursday, I'll be giving the final lecture on this part of the series about eternal reoccurrence, which is very much the integration of the lectures so far and how they interplay together. A deep dive into what life might be like to those who live for the next journey, which is one of the notions I want to address in eternal reoccurrence. It could potentially help with a bit of a perspective shift for your current life, and might help you approach things differently. And it's also very much about finding peace within like the Danse Macabre, as I have been explaining it. And hopefully by the end of that lecture, we'll at least be familiar with all the notions that help people, or that can help you dance peacefully. And that's pretty much most of what I have to say for this one. Anyone wants to contribute something or still has questions, now is your chance. And otherwise, I'll be giving the word back to Jeremy again.
Thank you so much for that presentation, and it was really interesting to see the practical applications that you provided. Yeah, it was great. I'm interested to see how you're going to wrap up this section of the lecture series, the section called La Danse Macabre. So that'll be in just 2 days, right?
Yes, that's correct. And, it's also I kept said this about multiple lectures, but this one is interesting because it is maybe one of the more debatable ones for people. But I do think that regardless of what your stance is, there are definitely lessons to take away from it. So that's, for me, that's the challenge of being able to bring the topic in that way, but also it's a fun challenge.
Very cool. Okay, well, if there are no questions that anybody wants to put on record, then I guess I will turn off the recording. One last chance. All right. Well, thanks again, Light, and I will be turning off the recording now.